Hello everyone, welcome to the first forum of our Overcoming COVID-19, Singapore's Strategy to Survive and Thrive in a New Normal e-Forum series. Our first forum in this series is themed The New Normal, Shaping Our Digital Economy and Workforce. I'm Sophia from Fudan University and I will be the moderator for this session. To start off, Inghan from OSG will briefly illustrate the rationale of organizing this e-forum series and the significance of the theme that we will be discussing today. Inghan, please.
Hi everybody, my name is Inghan. I'm from OSG and I have my team members with me today in Lily and Ken and a few other people. And it's a great pleasure for me to actually host this particular e-forum where we have three organizers. We ourselves, OSG, and we have Fudan University Singapore Student Association, FUSSA, as well as Singapore Student Association from Beijing. So we will actually be looking at how we can work together in this particular global pandemic period where we can really look into different ways and means of adapting to the new normal. So I think this e-forum series is very, very timely for us to explore from different views about how we can manage this particular new world order from now on. And I like to give applause to the people from FUSSA and SSA Beijing for working so hard on this. And obviously today with Sophia's moderation and facilitation, I'd like to welcome our Richard Tan, Mr. Richard Tan, as well as Mr. Rudy Lim for agreeing to share with us all the information that they had and their feedback about what is going on at this moment of time. And not to forget our our supporters here from National Library Board, from OSGN, Singapore Global Networks, NUS Enterprise, NIAN GEIP, Global Entrepreneur Internship Program, as well as Xincham Shanghai. So thank you then for the support and all our events here. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Sophia to start this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Inghan, for your introduction. So today's e-forum series is a collaboration between three organizations, and we have received staunch support for a lot more, and we sincerely thank all the supporting organizations. So to move on, let us introduce our speakers for tonight, Mr. Richard Tan and Mr. Rudy Lim. Mr. Tan is the General Manager of Shuion Group, as well as the Chief Executive of InnoSpace, a new generation innovation platform in China. Under his lead, InnoSpace has successfully produced 13 star ventures, each worth more than 100 million RMB within 12 months of their inception. He will be sharing more about how startups can rise above adversity during COVID-19 and grow their capability. Mr. Tan, would you like to say hi to everyone first? Yeah, okay. Next, we also have Mr. Rudy Lim with us. Mr. Rudy Lim is a ventures partner of Blockchain Founders Fund. He is also the former Head of Fintech DBS. During his time in DBS, he realized that integrating fintech solutions into DBS core business became increasingly important and necessary in order to disrupt traditional means of banking and maintain DBS foothold as the leading bank in the region. He will be focusing on how Singapore companies can adapt to digitalisation. Mr. Lim, would you like to say hi? Yeah, so without further ado, let us now pass the time to Mr. Tan, who will be starting his sharing first. Mr. Tan, please.
Can you see my PowerPoint now?
Yep, we can.
Yes. You can, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I think I will start my sharing by quickly run through what InnoSpace is all about, and then but really focusing on what's happening with the startup within InnoSpace, as well as maybe also touch a bit about our take on what's happening in the startup scene here in China. But I think towards the end of the at the Q&A session, it would be wonderful if it would be more interactive rather than just like one way. Yeah. So without further ado, let me just quickly go through. This InnoSpace, we started about 2011, 2012, and today we have evolved to become a very comprehensive innovation platform in China. Our head office, or rather our flagship, is in Shanghai, and we currently have got 4 incubators, 2 industry-specific accelerator. Then we also have a college as well as a venture club. Then centered to this slides actually put together what we meant by our innovation platform. Basically, like for incubator and accelerator, this act as a funnel for us to really identify startups to invest in, and for those startups that we have invested in, to provide better on-site portfolio management services. The college looks at essentially identifying good founders as well as developers that we could actually work on to start on new startup projects. VC Club really looks at linking up, matching our startups, be it our portfolio as well as our incubator to the other VC players in China. Core to that, of course, is we also have a corporate innovation arm. We actually provide an active matching between the big corporates in terms of their requirements with that of the startups. Yeah. So basically, how we look at it is that from 1 to there's actually some animation to these slides, but for the purpose of this sharing, the animation would not be displayed. But basically, from 0 to 1, basically, or rather 0 to 10, in terms of the startup incubation or rather startup development phase, we're talking more about providing the CEOs or rather the founders having some core technology as well as a business model. And we then provide very highly effective incubation services and giving them acceleration programs to help them to quickly ramp up. But that could only take startups to like 0 to 10, perhaps. But beyond that, going from 10 to 100 or even 1,000, basically we are thinking these startups really need industry resources as well as the whole industry ecosystem to help them to grow. And this is the part whereby it is not just, it goes beyond just incubation, but also acceleration plus open innovation, which looks at linking up startups with the multinationals or multinational, the big companies, the requirements and so on. And of course, centered to that, we have investment funds. So this is our business model, which we have actually built up over time. Now, to date, we have got about, So to date, we have got, we have got 4 incubators, 2 industry accelerators across Shanghai, Nanjing, and Shenzhen. And each of these actually focus on certain verticals and are working with some big companies here in China. Like for example, the one in Shanghai, we also have the first new retail supply chain management accelerator, which we work with Hong Kong Li and Feng Group. And in Nanjing, our incubator there, we are helping to manage Alibaba's incubation center. Yeah. So a bit on, just quickly run through, I don't want this to be very highly public, what do you call that, a PR or a marketing thing about InnoSpace. But this will give you an idea about how focused in whatever business you are in, it is important to stay focused and stay very, build up your own competitive advantage as you move along. So in terms of the incubation side, to date, we have incubated about more than 500 plus startups. 30+% have overseas background. Of course, majority of these are returning Chinese, but we are also seeing, we're also having pure foreigner projects, American, from Hong Kong, Singapore, Korean, and recently also Poland and Italian. Then over the last few years, we have successfully incubated and accelerated 13 star ventures, whose valuation exceed US 15 million within 12 months of inception. So our 5-year survival rate is about 70%. Yeah, so accelerator, I won't go too much into it. Yeah, so this is a slide 8 on our investment. So basically, our business model centered on incubation plus investment model. So I think everyone knows that incubators and accelerators across the world are money losing. So then how do we as a private sector entity stay in business or earn our bacon, that kind of thing, in a more sustainable manner? So basically what we are doing is really, we have to have a high rate of return on our investment in order to sustain our operation. And therefore this would in turn reflect in terms of the how effective our incubation services are, the kind of the content we are providing to our to the participants that get into our acceleration program, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So for our first funds, which was actually launched in 2015 July, we invested in 47 startups. 38 are ongoing. We have 4 exits over the last few years, and to date we have been able to return 80% of the investment capital back to the investor 3 years ahead of schedule. So, and in terms of, let's say, like the performance of our first funds, that put us on the top 20% of all the investment firms in China. Yeah. So then the next few slides is, talk about corporate innovation. What exactly do we mean by providing, what do you call it, matching startups with the big companies? And the reason why we are doing this is actually quite straightforward. And this actually, like earlier, if you remember, I talked about the strong performance of our funds. Basically, we are getting this, or rather our funds are able to perform or outperform the market. It's not so much that because we are very good in identifying good projects or whatever, but more because of this open innovation that we have been doing over the last few years. And this really centered on prior to or working with the big companies to identify their requirements and matching startup with that. And in the process, if there are some good startups that are successfully matched, we invest in the money, we invest our money into it. So this is there is no it's not a very scientific way, but it is a very effective means of doing that. Yeah. So this is actually a very important part of our business. I won't go too much into this then the last few slides is really more in terms of the resources that we have built up in the startup community. So we are a small team. We consider ourselves as a startup as well, but we have a team of about 30 plus people. That includes the all our operations across China, and that also includes our investment team. Now, the reason why we are able to do so much has also really been that we are very targeted, meaning to say that we know our own strength and we focus on this. So we also work with partners in the media services space, HR services, finance, and legal. So we don't do everything ourselves, but we work with partners. So we work, like we have our own core competitive advantage, our own core business, which we focus and continue to focus on. Now this, the next a few slides or 2 slides to talk about this whole Yangpu Public Innovation Space Promotion Agency. And the reason why I bring this up is that in the course of our work, we have been accorded Best Accelerator in Shanghai for the last few years. And in Yangpu district is, for those that are familiar with Shanghai, are aware that Yangpu district is the only district demarcated by the central government to be the what do you call that, the hub for innovation and entrepreneurship for Shanghai. And based on that, over the last few years, the Shanghai actually has got about 38 unicorns. Yangpu itself has got 7, which makes up about almost 20%. Of course, the biggest number is in Zhangjiang, but Zhangjiang because it's big, right? That kind of a thing. Now, the reason why I bring this up has been that previously we have been fairly good in doing what we are doing, but unfortunately, because of being focused, that has also had its disadvantage in terms of there are certain sectors that because we are not, our investment strategy and directions are not looking at, we are unable to provide support to the other startups. Yeah. But basically last year, the Yangpu government actually entrusted InnoSpace to take up the leadership position for this platform. So with that, we are able to then garner and all the resources from the other incubators and accelerators in Yangpu to help service our portfolio companies, our startups, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So these are the resources that we have also built up on the overseas base, globally. Now, this COVID-19, quite frankly, it has impacted us fairly strongly in a few areas. In terms of both our incubators and our accelerators, in terms of operations, thankfully, because of our the startups that we have been incubating and accelerating, this has not really been, in terms of the direct impact, it hasn't really been affecting them much. As this startups being internet related, they were able to bring their operation online. Yeah, and for the but for the tech startups, which requires a lot more like specialized equipment and lab, they did suffer a 1-month delay. Then in terms of the businesses, for our startups per se, there are some social media type of startups. Again, the social media site startups, the business have been mixed. I mean, the impact on these startups have been quite mixed. We have startups that are doing online dancing platform. So they are doing exceptionally well because with the lockdown and all these things, lockdown and all those things, a lot of youngsters, they need a place that, or rather they need an avenue whereby they can learn things and all these things. So Telltale is doing exceptionally well. We have got another social media startup called Xingzhe, which is more in terms of for bike fanatics. They are into competitions and all these things, but obviously their business are affected. Right? So other type of incubators or startups that we are hosting, especially in terms of the B2B type, their impact have really been quite indirect in terms of negative impact. So one of them actually, unfortunately, folded up because one big company defaulted on their agreement. And even though they took that, they took on the lawsuit, it wasn't enough to cover their loss. So as a result, they will have to get folded. Then of course, a lot of them are now having some delays in terms of business deals and so on and so forth. Yeah. Then in terms of our investment, obviously our portfolio companies are facing an even tougher environment to obtain investment, as many VCs are adopting a wait and see attitude. Corporate innovation side, if you recall, I mentioned that this is a very key part of our business in terms of linking and matching startups with the corporates. In terms of corporate innovation side, we have got two types of clients. Overseas government agencies, like for example, Korea, Italy. They have postponed their acceleration programs because, in their home country, they were not able to go and, the startups are actually also being locked in, and so on and so forth. So they have postponed their acceleration program with us. Then in terms of the other client base, the foreign multinationals, again, that has been quite mixed. Like for example, Sinoland. Sinoland is actually the Far East arm in Hong Kong. They are working with us. They've set up an innovation lab with us in Shenzhen. But because of this whole COVID-19, they are delaying coming over to get their business ramped up. But there are some, like then 3M is also getting very, because of the US Trump, like sending them the order to manufacture for them and so on and so forth. A lot of their attention are focusing on handling the US politics. But then there are some like Sembcorp or even some of the multinationals, they do see China as the only bright spot right now in their business. So a lot of them are actually putting, or rather trying to see how they can use China, because now China is getting back to business, etc., and so on and so forth. Seeing how to can strengthen that and work something even bigger, so that they can do, that they can fulfill their KPIs for the year, or even a large percentage of their KPIs through China. Then in terms of our operations, now this was actually quite a tedious process for us. We really tried to help our startups to quickly re-operationalize their projects as fast as possible. And this, because every district and every cities have got different requirements. So basically some of this will require like helping them to get resume work order from the local authority and so on and so forth. So that would also mean the local authority would only approve the startups so that they can resume operations if they meet certain requirements. And that would also like some of these basic ones would be like having masks, PPEs, and so on and so forth. Then for our side, we also invested in anti-COVID-19 systems in terms of tracking temperature and so on and so forth. And then we also have to set up a precautionary measures. Then financial, we also provide some financial assistance to our startups. By and large, depending on the locations or the city, we provide about 0.5 to 1.5 months of rental waiver. We also help this, but more importantly, we help the startups to obtain government grants. So this has been one of our strong, where we put in a lot of effort over the last 6 weeks, especially helping our startups to obtain government grants. So to date, we have helped about 10 projects to obtain about 550,000 or $500,000 RMB, equivalent to about 100K Sing dollars to get a grant from the government. 15 are in work in progress, and if all this go through, we're talking about close to about 800 to 900,000 RMB. Yeah. Now, the other assistance that we provide to our startups, in terms of business, for example, we actively help our startups to apply and compete in competition, because right now, like a lot of them on the B2B side, they are feeling the strain. Many of their clients are delaying decision making. Some of them are, postponing their procurements and whatsoever. So how do we help these startups to get more business or to get more funding? So one part is the government grants, and the other one is really to help them to apply and compete in some interesting competitions. Competitions that are aligned with their businesses, and also to help them in terms of global coverage, global business development, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so this we are Temasek Foundation's partner in China for their the livability competition, which looks at the prize money about 1 million Sing dollars grant. Yeah, and then APEC is a 24 million RMB competition, which we are co-hosting in Shenzhen. So again, we are encouraging our startups to participate and also help them to fine-tune their proposal and solutions to help them to win this competition. Then we also, again, as I said, step up matching effort between the startups and our multinationals. Right now, we are looking in the resource management space, especially in the light of COVID-19. Yeah. Now, a lot of manpower recruitment has always been an issue for many of our startups since last year. So with the COVID-19, we are even stepping up effort in this area. We are helping our startups in terms of their manpower recruitment, especially from other major cities like Beijing and so on. In fact, that we have done 2 rounds. And that's been quite positive, because I think some of the, it's actually a good time for the startups to actually hire good talent, which otherwise they might not have access to in a good times. Yeah. So we are also incentivizing our startups to help each other in terms of recruitment effort. And this is a rather different approach that we're doing as opposed to the other incubators or accelerators. We also incentivize startups to help each other. So ours is more of a community kind of a initiative rather than just a standalone, you know, like InnoSpace, one side helping the startups. We also want the startups to help each other. Now, the third part of it, as I mentioned earlier, 30% of our startup have overseas background. So the Shanghai government are also getting us to be heavily involved to help attract and retain startups, especially the Haikui and PLC talent that have moved overseas, but are now currently in China because of, you know, they come back here to seek refuge from COVID-19 and so on. So helping them to attract and retain this talent in China itself. So from the, previously we have a 千人计划. So now this has been expanded to call 万人计划 and so on. Then the government is also now ramping up on the 人才公寓, converting a lot of all this, ramping up quite a lot of idle apartments and all these things, using that for talent apartments and so on. So we are helping, working closely with the Shanghai city government on that front as well. Then, yeah, then technology licensing. We have signed a MOU with the 中高知识产权中心, which is actually a collection of 260 university and engineering colleges in China. So this is like the IP arm for the university in China. So we have the MOU with them last year, trying to so-called like commercialize some of this, the license or the IPs that are residing with the university and the engineering colleges, with the startup as well as with the multinationals. So we are actually stepping up effort on this front as well. Yeah, then of course the startups, the last few parts really talked about helping startups in terms of business, helping in terms of market, helping them in terms of manpower and technology. So the last part, of course, is on our own investment. You know, the where in terms of hard real cash, getting really tied up and partake in the growth of our startups. We have closed and set up our second fund in Nanjing, and we are on schedule to actually launch this fund in May 2020. And this is focusing on smart manufacturing and 5G. What is also interesting is that with this COVID-19, the Shanghai city government, because of our strong performance in our first funds, now they have already approved participating and investing in 30% on our third funds. Even before we are still in the very preliminary planning stage, but Shanghai city government has really committed to that. Yeah, so hopefully with that, we will be able to even provide more funding opportunity for our startups. I think the last few slides really talk about how do we see China in terms of the innovation space and the opportunity for startups in China over the next few years. So actually for us, the way we look at it is that this COVID-19 does not impact on the long term, because we're talking about investments and stuff like that. So basically, in terms of long-term development, in terms of long-term strategy or direction, it doesn't really change much in terms of our focus from our InnoSpace perspective. It does not affect much of that. But there are some, in terms of, let's say, maybe some interesting areas within this broader or rather this long-term thing that we so-called like put more attention, or rather look at some projects that are within that direction. So the reason why I put this slide also that this actually provides a very an overview on why China are able to so-called like, first of all, why Chinese government and are putting a lot of effort and initiative as well as money into innovation and entrepreneurship, right? Then primarily this then boils down to like from there, what are some of the startups that are actually coming really very strongly, or rather though, if we look at the whole development of the startup scene in China, what has come out very strongly and what would be the next the next wave, right? So the customer like B2C type of projects, we do see like Meituan Dianping, those kind of projects, or even Ali, this Taobao and all these guys coming out really strongly. And this was really because this is actually the easiest way for China as a whole to jumpstart in terms of using IT or using technology to improve the efficiency within the services sector. So obviously B2C type is really quite easy to ramp up. So we also have got a lot of app, B2C kind of app coming up really strongly. So that's the reason why, like in the first wave, we do see a lot of Chinese startups very strongly coming up from this because of that. Now, the second one is of course the China being the manufacturing, or rather the factory of the world. So obviously the next part that we are looking at, or rather the next wave of opportunity in China would really be those startups that are able to provide solutions to help improve the efficiency for the manufacturing sectors. So that's the reason why, like in 2 years ago, the Chinese government started promoting and driving this whole thing about smart manufacturing. Yeah. But before that, in 2015, InnoSpace, we have already started focusing on, at that time we call it Industry 4.0. So we started working with Siemens, working with Honeywell, even BMW for connected cars and so on and so forth. So this is talking about efficiency-driven type of projects and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I won't go too much into this. If you guys want, you can request the slides from Sophia or whatever. Now, as I said, that is our long-term, how we look at the whole startup development, as well as the opportunity from the investment side. So, and as such, if we look at, as I mentioned just now, my second fund focusing on smart manufacturing and 5G. Now, with this pandemic, so what is actually happening? Is there any changes? As I said, it's not going to change much in terms of our long-term direction and so on, but there are some part of it which we would look at in that we could look at and these are indeed opportunity for us to also focus in, right? Primarily what we are seeing from COVID-19 is that it really changes people's behavior in terms of lifestyle, work style, and learn style. You know, previously people, or rather, people tend to ask, why are we doing things, or why do we need to do things online? Why can't we meet face to face? Right? I mean, obviously, but in China, obviously, e-commerce site has so-called like leapfrog ahead. But for many other countries, going down to the stores, the departmental store, supermarket, is still a very, it's still a way of life. But this is going to change a lot, right? So really from lifestyle, then work style, a lot of it, the lock-in, we need to work from home, and so on and so forth. So therefore, collaborative type of collaborative work projects type of solutions like Zoom. We do see Zoom itself. We are using Zoom today. In terms of prices, share prices, they've skyrocketed since with this COVID-19. So these are some of the changes. And of course, the learn style. A lot of educations from the classroom, we are now have forced to do it online. So this is the broad frame of things, that how things are going to evolve, whether or not we are in Singapore or in China. Yeah. Now in China, digital transformation will even be faster. Now there'll be a lot of, especially in cloud computing, a lot of corporates are going to use the cloud computing to do a lot of things, collaborative work, and so on and so forth. So there is going to see a lot of a ramp up on that front. Then online education, social media, etc. So these are things that are coming up. Then of course the healthcare services. Then we're going to see a quantum leap, especially with AI being massively applied across healthcare, be it diagnostic, treatment, and what have you, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So basically, this is how we do see things evolving in China. Then the other part of it, which is actually not reflected here, is that we also believe, as I said, right, this COVID-19 changes people's behavior, and so on and so forth. And we are also looking at there's another changes that is going to bring about in terms of the various industry sectors, primarily in the real estate. Because real estate, especially in the highly urbanized, there is actually a drive towards urbanization in China. So cities like Shanghai, will get bigger and bigger. Now, so then there'll be a lot of, and I mentioned just now, right, the people's behavior, lifestyle, work style, learn style. So how is this going to affect real estate? So it's going to be quite different from how these things are going to be. Take for example, working. So a lot of people, or rather, maybe some of you are familiar with like WeWork in a co-working space kind of a thing. So now with this online, like work from home kind of a thing, primarily the whole demand for physical space, physical workspace, will become a big question mark.
Richard,
yeah.
Sorry,
I
think you might have to give the other speaker a chance because you are
sorry.
over time. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so I'll just stop here. Sorry,
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Tan, for your very informative sharing. So as we can see, InnoSpace has a very impressive track record and has a very stable relationship with a lot of organizations, especially with the government. Hence, it is able to reach out to other startups and provide very substantial operational and financial support. So now we'll pass the time to Mr. Rudy Lim to share more about his experiences as a former head of Fintech DBS.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to do a little bit of screen check. Are you guys seeing my slides?
Oh, cannot see.
Okay. What about now?
Still cannot leh.
Oh yeah, can.
All good? Awesome. All right, so for those who have joined us, very good evening. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rudy, and I used to head up the fintech team back in DBS. Today, primarily the agenda is really to talk about, how this whole COVID situation has, affected us, and this really brings us back to the situation of digitalization, right? Like how, corporates, when they digitize, right, it really reflects, in today's context, when people stay at home and the dependency on digital services has, tremendously increased. And from the perspective of hiring, how does that actually correlate back to you, right? Especially for ladies and gentlemen, when you are graduating from school and looking for a job, you really want to know what's the psyche and what's the mindset behind hirers. If you don't mind me, then perhaps I would go back to the story of DBS, its journey on digitalization, and then I'll link that back to, how digitalization is important to you, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so before I begin, just a quick guess, right, everyone, what do you think, back in the days of 2008, when they have the economic crisis, right, DBS stands for, the word literally, Anyone could make a guess. Back in those days, by the way, DBS is ranked #1 from the bottom. Okay, it's one of the worst ranking bank in terms of brand itself. So just a quick guess, right? What do you think DBS stands for?
Developmental Bank of Singapore.
That's the actual brand name. But okay, no prizes for winners. DBS actually stands for damn bloody slow, right? Because being the sovereign bank in Singapore, right, everybody queues up at the ATM, trying to get their cash and all that, and services become very laden, after a while, just from the mere fact that they are not actually enhancing a lot of their processes, so things become very slow and very laggy, and then becomes a very bad brand for Singaporeans to use. So eventually, when the new CEO joins, he make the mandate and say, look, we want to be the best bank in Asia, right? 2 years. 5 years, I don't care, right? Let's make it happen. And in 2014, DBS Bank became the best bank in Asia. And what happens after that, right? The next goal actually was in the next 4 years, a crazy, audacious goal, which is DBS as a Singaporean bank to be the best bank in the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have actually achieved that audacious goal in 2019, and DBS Bank is actually the best bank in the world rated by eFinancials. So you guys can actually find some of those information online, but without further ado, let me go straight into the presentation proper, so that gives you a little bit of idea of how we get there. And of course, I have to begin with one of my idol, right? He did say something that is very mooted and very relevant in terms of where we are today, right? He said, banking is necessary, but banks are not, right? So it really makes us think about, the service versus, the entity, right? So what is really important now, right? It draws us back to who the service is for, right? Eventually, it's really for the customers, right? In every element of how we design the bank today, it always goes back to, not the monetary benefits itself, for the bank, but how our customers could enjoy, the engagement with the services when it comes to banking. And especially so when it's a very, very tight space like this, right? If you see the screen now, and those who have not visited Singapore, this is actually Marina Bay. If you stand across, you can see, our landscape of all our offices. Obviously, you can see DBS Bank on the left. What is really interesting here is there is actually a lot of space within one, a lot of banks within one picture, right? There is UOB, Citibank, Standard Chartered, Maybank, and so on and so forth. It really shows how competitive the banking landscape is, and really how important it is, for a sovereign bank like DBS to really buck up and, do something about its services, its offering, and in terms of, having itself position itself correctly in the competition, right? But you see, here's the thing. On your left, you see the ATM machine, and that was actually the very first the picture of an ATM machine being launched on Wall Street about 60 years ago. And then on your right is a present ATM machine. Not much of a difference, isn't it? Despite the bank keeps telling us that they have enhanced everything, innovate, to the call of things. And look, one very physical evidence, that you see almost every day of your life, right, is how much has actually changed. So the cute thing about this is we ask any CEO of any businesses, right, how they feel their services in terms of the standard, right, is to their customers. They always say, it's pretty awesome, right? 80%, our services, our business is good, But have you ever asked a customer from their perspective, what do you think is the level of service that they are enjoying from, the business? 8%. So as you can see, this is stark, difference between, expectations and reality, right? And this gap created some big problems for the bank. And let me introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually a screenshot of Wells Fargo. I know it's a little bit messy there, but you will be able to pick up some of the services from insurance to loans to retirement plans, wealth management, so on and so forth. But then surrounding all that services is actually fintechs. The reason why so many fintechs are able to enter this space is because of the gap that I've mentioned earlier. They're able to address those gaps, right, in terms of efficiency, in terms of user interface, user experience, in terms of convenience, in terms of pricing. There's so many opportunities that the banks put on the table for the fintech to just take, So this is some consideration, for the new generation to really think about, in terms of opportunities within the fintech space, right? Another mood example would be, it takes about 50 years for DBS to accumulate about $100 billion worth of transaction. How long do you think it took Alibaba to do that? 11 months. 11 months to accumulate $100 billion of transaction, which took DBS Bank 50 years to accomplish. So really, we should not undermine, the ability of fintechs and startups, especially in today's terms of things, right? So let's bring us back to DBS as a company. We really have to ask ourselves, who is the boss then, right? It's really not the one that we report into, or the CEO of the company. Really, the boss is the customer. The customer is the one that put food on our table, right? And if you really, have this mindset shifted a little bit, right, it brings us to really think about then how do we build our business around that customer? And this sheds some light in terms of, the strategy that we have adopt, right? So very quickly, this is kind of a bit of a governing framework that we use in terms of approaching how, the company would transform itself, right? And the very first thing that we do, which is on the left top corner, is leadership. One fine day, Piyush Gupta, which is CEO of DBS Bank, he gave a speech, right? And he said to all the bank colleagues, and he said that, number one, we are not a bank. DBS is not a bank, right? DBS is a technology company, right? So that suddenly, shook us up a bit, right? Because this is all about addressing the cultural elements, right? When people say, like, I don't want to touch technology, this is not what we do. Piyush addressed right at that point by saying, no, this is exactly what we do, right? We are a technology company and we're going to digitize to the core, Secondly, he says, to all his one-down generals, right, that 2% of your balanced scorecard attributes back to innovation. So suddenly everybody woke up and go like, okay, what does innovation means, right? So from that point, it cascades downwards. Everybody starts to straighten up in their seat and go like, okay, this time round the bank is serious, right? It needs to transform, and the boss is saying it, and it impacts our income, right? So leadership is always the first thing that moves first, right, in our framework, right? And it follows by the culture. So now when it cascades down, people start to think about, seriously what innovation means, what does digitalization means, right? How do I get my bonus at the end of the day? How do I submit those performance, and how do I include those performance as part of my daily work? So that becomes culture, because when there's a culture shift, it always started from the mindset shift, right? And after you have people, starting to understand, and appreciate and open their mind to transformation in terms of the digital space, you got to let them have the ability to do so. And that's why, on the left bottom of the quadrant, you have programs and tools. You have to actually teach people how to innovate, teach people how to use technology. So then we have a series of programs to be able and enable people to do that. Because PU says this is not a bank of 26,000 employees. This is a bank of 26,000 entrepreneurs and enablers. So we need to enable them, we need to give them tools. Eventually, and only because we have the ability to work with technology, then the technological play comes into the picture. And I will talk a little bit about the technological foundry that we have created in the bank, which is a little bit unique. So I will spend 2 to 3 more minutes on that in the later slide. So today, right, it's really about, you guys, coming into the workforce, and, especially for corporates who has been more forward thinking and has shifted a little bit on culture. The way we hire, tends to be also a little bit different. And the best way for me to exemplate and illustrate this is through some of the projects that we have done. And that really shows you how, we think quite differently. Let's talk about the very first program called UNI.CORN. I think it's a bit corny, but so what UNI.CORN really exemplates is it's actually a management associate program, right? And most management associate program, as you would know, you go through the interview, you go through probably a year of rotation in different departments, right? But then the selection process for that has always been quite traditional and very standard. Would that actually address our current needs in terms of finding the next generation leader, right? Things in terms of whether this leader is able to hustle, whether this leader is able to work under very lean working condition, tight budgets, small team, very little resources, whether this leader is able to think out of the box, right? Whether this leader is able to challenge the status quo, right? And bring our product and services to another level, right? All these questions are in the heads of the hirers, but then how does it shows in terms of, our process, in terms of hiring the correct candidates, right? So we created this program called the UNI.CORN Management Internship Program, whereby it requires us to put up a so-called a pseudo accelerators, where the banking business heads provide the students real banking challenges. And in this room, where all the shortlisted students are in the room, they are supposed to form teams. And while they form teams, they are supposed to identify the leader and identify the solution and create a minimal viable product within that span of 3 months. And they're supposed to pitch. But what the student doesn't know is the mentor that's mentoring this team are actually the business head, which is basically their future employer, the person that makes a decision whether they want to employ so and so forth students. Why we want to put them in such a harsh condition, and because we really want to see under pressure, right, under lean resources, whether they are able to think out of the box. Are they able to actually crack the problem creatively, right? Are they able to lead the team, right, to finish the project on time, right? So this program has run for a while, and we have accomplished quite a bit of success. In fact, a couple of the projects are being implemented in today's services that we rolled out. So I would say, ladies and gentlemen, if you're really looking for a job, this is one of the things that you have to think about, right? Like, how do you actually show your tenacity, right, and your ability to really, overcome traditional challenges by incorporating modern solution, and it's always good to actually read up a little bit more, in terms of the tech news and the tech solution, if this is something that really interests you, and how do you use that to enhance your interview chances, right? Now, another interesting thing that we do is, we know that hackers are great developers, right? But the problem about hackers is, of course, their credentials are very questionable, and they are anti-organization, right? They don't really like to join very traditional organization. So one day, we came up with this crazy, dumb idea to say, why don't we do a 48 hours hackathon and literally hire hackers that can hack into the bank? So we created some banking vulnerabilities. We got open invitation, to Russia, to China, to Hong Kong, anybody, India, right, who wish to join DBS Bank, feel free to hack, into the bank, and the winners get an opportunity to work together with us. And in that span of time, we thought nobody would apply, right? It's a dumb idea, right? In that span of time, 12,460 applications, right? Not 90 plus unicorns, but that's a wrong number. It's 300 shortlisted candidates from the 12,460, and we have actually hired 50 candidates into the bank. And now is the part that I skip a little bit forward so that I can talk a little bit more about the technology, which I promised everyone. So the way we look at technology today, it is very different, right? Because we didn't want to reinvent the whole wheel. And obviously from the fintech perspective, there is a lot of application that's already being created by startups out there. The question is, how do you evaluate the viability of those startups solutions? How do you know that they are not fly-by-night companies? How do you know that they have the technological capacity to integrate with your demanding needs in terms of your solutions that you want to roll out to all your banking clients? So there's only one way to find out, which is to experiment, right? So basically, we will try to understand, what exactly do we want to solve within the bank. So the fintech team that I manage provide that consultancy ability, right, to speak with any business business departments within the bank, and do a needs analysis, right, to understand where exactly is the problem and if there's even a fintech opportunity coming to solve it. However, if it's buying like 5 iPads, then we say, guys, go to procurement, right? So if we identify that there's a real problem that technology can solve, we will do a tech assessment and a global scan, right? Whereby we have a network of about 200 to 300,000 startups that we can speak with to find the correct solutions, and then we perform due diligence to make sure that they are actually qualified to be shortlisted for usage, right? And obviously, because traditional organization or any big and small organization, they have the existing processes, compliance, procurement, info security, so on and so forth. All these things, we really have to think how we can actually integrate them, into the organization, and hence it's also part of the process. And eventually, we try to actually time box a proof of concept. Right? In the proof of concept, we should at least have one minimal viable product and test it at least 1 or twice, so that the bank can evaluate that. And this is a very interesting process, ladies and gentlemen, because if you don't do a POC, what actually usually happen is people got too excited about technology. They plunge in $250,000 to $1 million, to adopt the technology, only to find out that either they're too ahead of time, it cannot integrate with the bank existing systems, and a whole bunch of other issues, right? So I think the best way to find out, right, is really to test. And I remember a saying from Thomas Edison, right? Because I believe in your mind also, right, is what is the rate of passing, right? And what's the rate of failing? Now, in this scenario, really, like I would like to quote Thomas Edison, right? When he died, right, he doesn't really have a solution in terms of creating a battery to store electricity. He tried 22,000 times, and somebody interviewed and asked him, wouldn't you be embarrassed to be such a famous person to have failed 22,000 times? And his answer was, not at all, because there's 22,000 reasons why this thing cannot work, right? So in his head, he knows that, I'm actually drawing closer and closer to the solution. And same thing for the bank, the way we think is we are really not shy of failing, right? The intensity here is to fail as much as possible so that we know when is the best time to really incorporate the correct technology, or what is the condition for us to be ready to incorporate technology, where we need to improve, and where we should time our solutions. So these are all the learnings based on all our experimentations, right? So today, I really want to emphasize a couple of things. Number one is, really to embrace the digital world, internalize, all the solutions that's available, experiment with it, and really appreciate how this, technology is not just, something that we consume as a service, but how this technology can create value for people and solve people's problem, right? Secondly, always ask yourself, even when we got hired, right, be it, from a junior executive to senior executive, right, the things that we do, how does it really improve and impact, right, our customer, right, in terms of whether the customer is literally somebody's buying our service or product, or the customer is actually somebody that is a user of our services and solution. Really think through, how and what we do make a difference in their life, right? And most importantly, in today's world, efficiency is king. And I feel that, the startup culture really embrace that level of efficiency. Is the never say die attitude, right? Like, I will figure things out somehow. And I think that's very important, not just because, you are an existing startup, right? But even as an employee in an organization, really think about, like how I can actually circumvent this problem and mount a valuable solution, right? And propose it to the organization. And finally, of course, talking about the bank, talking about the economy in Singapore, right? It's really a safe haven, in today's competitive space for us to really, provide wealth management services, right? So those who are pursuing a career in the wealth management space, and have a lot of questions, on how you can really tap on the digital reach, and how do you want to position yourself in terms of, being in an interview, stuff like that. I'm happy to, fork out some time to help you along the way. My WeChat ID is over there, and, like if you have questions, just shoot up to me. I think there is probably some time left for me to answer some question. And so with that, I thank you very much for being very patient with my presentation, and I wish you the best in your career pursuits.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lim, for sharing your expertise. So as someone who has spearheaded DBS FinTech team to embrace digitalization, transforming DBS from damn bloody slow to damn bloody solid, I really applaud your efforts. So I can tell that there are a lot of questions in the chat room, so the speakers can actually assess these questions by opening the chat room function. We'll move on into the Q&A segment. Due to the shortage of time, we'll try to keep this segment short and sweet. So let me first pose the first question that I observed. It will be from Ms. Joyce Zhang. So it's a question directed to Mr. Tan. She asked, are overseas Chinese who return disadvantaged in some ways to compete in the local startup ecosystem because the returnees are often perceived as someone who is not grounded in the local culture?
Yes and no. Actually, the local Chinese, or rather the Chinese startup scene is highly competitive. For whether they are returning Chinese or foreigners, such as Singaporeans coming over to China, there is not much of a difference, per se. The returning Chinese, in fact, if they are being held in a or rather if they work in multinationals, especially in the engineering or the scientific arms, the R&D lab of things, they are in fact very well embraced. They are well appreciated, yeah, by their colleagues as well as by the locals. Yeah. So long gone are those days where I know there are, I think, some resistance calling them tiu tiao, you know, that kind of thing. But I think in today's world, especially in Chinese government's drive towards technology supremacy in many key sectors, their contribution in China would be even more appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tan. There are some more questions in the chat room, and I think they are directed at the fintech area. So, Mr. Lim, have you seen some questions that you'd like to answer? I believe that there are quite a few.
Okay, I think I'll pick one from Tun Lee, which is how does DBS source for its tech? In order to stay on top as a tech company, we basically build up a library, and this library is really connected within the ecosystem, the tech ecosystem, right? We talk to VCs, we talk to incubation companies, accelerators companies, and it's a win-win situation because here we are trying to use an opportunity for the tech startups to really experiment together with us. And we hope that, you know, with the DBS brand, it really helps them to open up more doors. But more importantly, we actually for the POs, right? The POs actually allow them to put food on the table at the same time, you know, to have the brand. But then they also got a shot at actually implementing the project. So the whole concept about, you know, the upside of working with DBS actually attracted a lot of good vibes, right, from the ecosystem, and that gives us a lot of opportunity to tap into good startup, right, whether inbound or from the library that we have built.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me take a look at the other questions. Okay, I believe there's one question from Ximing. The question is, should trade costs increase and liberalization efforts slow down post-COVID-19? And how can SG startups better ride up this wave of change? Thank you. I think maybe Mr. Tan, would you like to answer this?
I think there's not much of a difference between SG startups or foreign startups or Chinese startups. It's just that you have to really stay very focused. China, they in the face of this trade war with the US, definitely the government realized that that was why I said that as long as you have got certain capability, coming to China and be able to start your own projects or you work in a company, you'll be well appreciated. So the Chinese government, there is a strong push towards tech development in certain key sectors. So therefore, likewise for Singapore startups or foreign startups, you need to know exactly where is your play in this whole scheme of things. How can you, like, in terms of technology supremacy or in terms of technology age, what do you have that the Chinese startups do not have, that, you know, like that will give you a push forward? Yeah, I think that this is not just about being in China or even in some other country as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tan. Next Could we have one more question from Mr. Lim, please? I think due to time constraint, that might be the last question we can accept. Mr. Lim, do you see any questions you'd like to answer?
Okay, that's the question from Phi. It says, traditional banks are just brick and mortar, facilitating as a storage of currency and transaction. High fixed costs due to staff rental and security, etc. PayPal and Visa, on the other hand, can do the same at a much lower cost, especially transactional cost. Hence, the disruption together with robo-advisory that gives you the bank's RM a run for their money, right? So here's the thing, when you part with your money, I think you will demand a lot more customized solutions to fit your financial needs. Just by going to a website and just picking up some robo recommendation is not good enough. Maybe from a retail perspective, a small amount of money, you can bet and gamble on that, but I'm not talking about that, right? I'm talking about a larger amount of fun. You need somebody to actually advise you in terms of how to strategically place those funds. In today's context, I haven't seen one global advisory entity that has focusing on AUM of like 550 million and up without some personal intervention. So I think let's be a bit realistic about the current state of technology. It is great that the technology is developing well and forth in this space. But let's just take account of where we are today. I think the best recommendation I would have is really a hybrid between having RM with assisted recommendation from the markets and make those recommendations, those sound recommendations. I think machines are great for calculation, right? Machines are great for spilling out information very quickly. But then it really takes the RM from his experience number one, right, to how to position the investment properly, manage the investment as it moved. Number two, right, is really the relationship. I think the second element is also important, especially if anyone is pursuing in the space of sales, right, or relationship management. Sometimes you might think that it's all about numbers, but often, right, your pocket is actually closer to your heart than the head, right? It's really about who you trust in terms of parting with your funds. So these are elements that I hope would balance off in terms of anybody who's jumping straight to the extreme end of investing in robo advisory. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Lim. We'll have one final question. This is posted from one of our supporting organizations, and I think it's a brilliant one. So it'll be open for both speakers to answer. The question is, while we recognize the growth of tech, startup, and digital sectors, this is a very strong sector and will absorb employment. Are there any sectors that would likely to see a sustained growth and hence viable in terms of employment opportunities for graduates? So moving out further from the tech sectors, are there any other sectors that still provide such opportunities for employment?
I think the whole COVID-19 and all these things, especially for China, healthcare services, be it online or offline, I think that this is the part that they are going to have massive investment, both by the Chinese government as well as the private sector to ramp it up. So therefore, in terms of employment opportunity, I think other than tech, healthcare services or healthcare sectors is going to be massive for China.
Yeah, what about Mr. Lim? Is there a sector that you observe that will provide such room for growth?
I think Richard has addressed the sector part quite adequately. In my opinion, I think you also must consider about where you can manifest your best potential, right? Because in any way that you go and you are a specialist in that area, right, you carve out your own special space, right, your own special spot and your own special value. I think to your question is really about what do you think you can do that synergize with what the market wants, and pursue that area.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Lim and Mr. Tan, for addressing all these questions. Due to time constraint, we are unfortunately able to accept more, but we can always communicate post-forum. And moving on, here are some last reminders for everyone before we are going to take our group photo. So if you are keen to join in our networks, right, you can scan the QR codes on the slide. Could we have the slide, please? Yeah. So you can join Singapore Global Networks group if you haven't, to expand your connections and stay connected with what's happening in Singapore from wherever you are. This is especially essential for people who are situated overseas, be it entrepreneurs or students. Could we have the slide on SGN, please?
Give me a moment now.
Okay, and if anyone would like to reach out to the speakers, they have provided their WeChat contact in the chat room itself. So please note it down before the end of session. And yes, that's SGN's QR code. Feel free to scan it and sign up. Next, moving on, please also feel free to join OSG's WhatsApp group, where we'll be sharing post-forum materials such as podcasts and transcripts. So basically, we have recorded today's session and we'll be consolidating the material so that you will be able to review even after this session. So please join our WhatsApp group and receive updates about upcoming events as well. So our next e-forum in this Overcoming COVID-19 series will be tentatively on 16 May, also a Saturday, and we'll be addressing the career prospects in the evolving job market. So please note it down if you intend to join our session. And there are also weekly entrepreneurship forums from the OSG side, the next one being next Thursday. So feel free to sign up also. So at the end, also help us fill out this survey if you have any feedback or suggestions. Yeah, so that will be all for our reminders, and we sincerely thank everyone for your active participation in the forum today. Could we have everyone turn on your video camera so that we can take a group photo, please? And don't leave the call yet. Yeah. Okay, let me see. Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in today. Okay, we'll give everyone some time to brush up on your appearances and turn on the video camera.
We'll be taking the screenshot in 10 seconds. Okay. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Smile. Okay, one more. Smile. Okay, last one. Smile. Okay, got it.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
For tuning in.
you.
And thank you for all our supporting organizations. Have a great night and stay safe.